Good evening. One more time. Good evening. It's good to see you all. Welcome to this lecture and conversation about Dr. Tony Campolo's legacy of preaching and ministry. I'm David Stark, the director of the Kerygma Initiative here at Palmer Theological Seminary. The Kerygma Initiative seeks to resource preachers and respond to the urgent need for innovative, transformative preaching in today's complex world. Funded by the Lilly Endowment, the Kerygma Initiative exists to inspire, equip, and sustain preachers who proclaim the joy and the justice of the gospel. We are so glad that you're here today. I want to go ahead and take advantage of this opportunity to say to clergy that 2 weeks from today, we are hosting a conference on prophetic preaching at the American Baptist Home Mission Society's building, and would love to invite you to check that out. You can register via our website and other emails as well. Before we begin, I want to take a minute just to offer a word of thanks. You know, these things don't happen with one person doing their own work. And I want to start by thanking the Kerygma Initiative team, Jimmy Atkins, James Williams, and especially Bethany Henderson, who's standing there in the back. Bethany and our team's work, their vision, their creativity have really made this event happen, and made it happen so wonderfully. I also want to thank Robert Gauthier, whom you will meet in a moment, and the Campolo Center for co-sponsoring this event and for their creative collaboration on tonight's speaker and discussion. Lastly, let me thank the staff at Eastern, facilities, IT, our staff at Palmer who are helping us share this conversation beyond this night, catering, facilities. It's just been a wonderful gift to get to work with them and to share in offering of hospitality to our guests and to you all here tonight as well. It is now my pleasure to invite Robert Gauthier to introduce himself further and to say a little bit about the Campolo Center before he then offers the opening prayer. Please welcome Robert Gauthier.
Thank you, and good evening. Good to see all of you, many familiar faces and some new faces. Like I said, David said, I'm Robert Gauthier, the Executive Director of the Campolo Center for Ministry, which, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a legacy initiative in honor of the late Reverend Dr. Tony Campolo, who was an alum of Eastern and taught here for many, many years as the chair of sociology. And the Campolo Center exists really to remember Tony, and we are dedicated to continuing to listen to and learn from him. We have 45 Campolo Fellows. They are undergrad, graduate, and seminary students. And I'm delighted that two of our PhD students, the Reverend David Brown and Reverend James Williams, will be engaging our guest speaker tonight. So they're backstage. But if you're a Campolo Fellow, would you please stand up so that others can identify you? Thank you. Thank you. The reason I'm so excited to be collaborating with the seminary and the Kerygma Initiative on this is that it really isn't, many of our students got to visit Tony, got to spend time with Tony. He mentored them. He asked them tough questions about their faith and the Bible and theology and life. So they had that experience, that one-on-one mentoring. But just last year, in the fall of 2025, was our first cohort that came into Eastern and Palmer who didn't and won't have the chance to sit down and chat with Tony. So what makes this so special is that the Bishop, Reverend Dr. Will Willimon, was a good friend of Tony's. They wrote books together, or wrote a book together. They shared the speaking platforms together. He's got stories about their life and shared faith and shared commitment to serving the church and preaching the gospel. And so not only do all of you and all the fellows that are here, but the two fellows that are going to be interviewing Dr. Willimon will have a chance to reflect together on Tony, who left his mark on me and so many of us. And it's always good to look back at the saints and people that have come before us, to listen to and learn from them, and that's what we're trying to do. So I'm delighted to be collaborating. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you all for being here. Please join me now in a prayer. Good God, we give thanks to you for friendship and fellowship and food that we had tonight. Thank you for this opportunity to reflect on the life of someone who dedicated his life and his mission to following you and to pointing others to Jesus. We thank you for the work and witness of those serving as pastors in the church, like Reverend James Williams and Reverend David Brown and others who are in the audience. We're grateful for the ways that you equip us and we can learn together in community and at events like this. Bless all those who speak, and bless all of us who are here to listen and learn. And we ask all this in your Son's name. Amen.
Our esteemed lecturer this evening is Bishop Will Willimon, and he wanted me to share with you all that his lecture is titled, "The Last Evangelical." The Last Evangelical. The Reverend Dr. William H. Willimon is professor of the practice of Christian ministry at Duke University Divinity School. He served for 8 years as bishop of the North Alabama Conference of the United Methodist Church, and for 20 years as the dean of the chapel and professor of Christian ministry at Duke University. Previous to these appointments, Dr. Willimon served as pastor of churches in Georgia and in South Carolina. In 1996, an international survey conducted by Baylor University named Bishop Willimon one of the 12 most effective preachers in the English-speaking world. His pulpit resource continues to be used each week by thousands of preachers in the U.S., Canada, and Australia. Willimon's articles and homiletical essays have appeared in publications including Theology Today, Interpretation, Liturgy, and Christianity Today. He is also an editor-at-large of the Christian Century. Dr. Willimon is a graduate of Wofford College, Yale Divinity School, and Emory University. He is a prolific author who has sold over 1 million copies and has written roughly 100 books. I will not be offering you a synopsis of all 100 of those. I do wonder if Will could do that. Maybe we can put him on the spot later. But let me mention just a few to give you a sense of some of his work and influence. His book, Worship as Pastoral Care, was selected by the Academy of Parish Clergy as one of the 10 most useful books for pastors in 1979. In 1989, Willimon and Stanley Hauerwas published Resident Aliens, Life in the Christian Colony, which continues to be a widely influential book that calls for Christians to reject the idea of a Christian nation and to see themselves instead as resident aliens in a foreign land. In 1995, Willimon and Richard Lisher wrote the Concise Encyclopedia of Preaching, which continues to be a vital reference for homiletics. In 2009, Willimon, along with Joel Green, served as the general editors of the Wesley Study Bible. And in 2018, his book, Who Lynched Willie Earl? Preaching to Confront Racism, was selected as the Book of the Year by the Evangelical Press Association. One of the many reasons we have invited Dr. Willimon to join us this evening is that he co-wrote a book in 2002 with Dr. Tony Campolo. In Survival Guide for Christians on Campus, How to Be Students and Disciples at the Same Time, Willimon and Campolo insist that the Christian faith is not threatened by tough questions. To make their point, each chapter presents a tough question, from the existential, how do I know if I'm Christian, to the eminently practical, how can I listen to a sermon and get something out of it? Dr. Willimon and Dr. Campolo were friends, colleagues, and troublemakers for Jesus. and they continue to be influential scholars and honorary leaders of the church who care deeply about theology and praxis, but never more than they care for all of the people of God. On a personal note, I want to share with you, Dr. Willimon was the first professor I had in seminary. And in what I believe was the very first lecture that I attended in seminary, Dr. Willimon stood up and said something honorary to the class like this: "I don't know why you're here. God clearly didn't consult me about this." And then he paused for what felt like an eternity. And I thought to myself, oh geez, what have I gotten myself into here? But Dr. Willimon interrupted my thought before I could even finish it with this line: "Apparently God knows something more about you and God's plans for your service in this world than I do." And over that semester, and for the next 25 years of my life, with grace and truth and care, Dr. Willimon has helped me to see something of what God sees in me and the service God has planned for me, and I have been the better for it. So please join me in welcoming preacher, scholar, honorary leader of the church, prolific author, teacher, troublemaker for Jesus, mentor, storyteller, and friend, Bishop Will Willimon.
David. Thank you. It's great to be at Eastern, and thank you, Eastern University, for being a light to so many of us over the years. After ICE killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis last month, the Reverend Dr. Albert Mohler, president of Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, in his weekly show, The Briefing, told his evangelical listeners that Minneapolis was ground zero in a vast cultural war. He praised ICE as a legitimate, federally authorized law enforcement agency involved in a deadly standoff between duly authorized federal immigration agents and a bunch of dangerous, very well-organized leftist activists, in his words, hell-bent on fomenting intentional confusion with their whistles. And then Dr. Mohler cited Romans 13, saying that our task as Christians is clear. It is to be submissive to and respectful of the governing authorities, like ICE. And he said that maybe this is a time for gospel Christians to do our bit to stand up and be counted in the cultural war. Mohler never mentioned Jesus. It's all interesting because during Trump's first run for president, Mohler warned evangelicals that we could destroy all of our credibility with America by supporting, quote, a pagan like Donald Trump, saying, and I quote, "Trump is beneath the baseline level of human decency. He is a known sexual predator." But then Trump got elected, and now Mohler calls him a governing authority to which all good evangelicals should submit. I prayed, Lord, whatever happened to Bible-believing evangelicals? Now what I prayed was, where is Tony Campolo when you need him? The last true evangelical. Tony said in a sermon in Duke Chapel, governments are created, says Romans 13, to do good for their citizens. They, governing authorities, are going to be judged by Christ. And people have a right to resist governments that are not doing good for their people. Dr. Mohler got his PhD in biblical interpretation. Tony Campolo got his PhD in sociology. But if you want to know the truth about Romans 13, go with Tony, not Dr. Moeller. I first met Tony at a big pastors' gathering out in California, and I gave some kind of stiff presentation, and I think it was because Tony felt sorry for me afterwards. He said, "Hey, come on, go to lunch with some of me and my buddies." And here was, at that time, the evangelical celebrities. Becky Piepert was there. The Newsboys were singing. Jim Wallace was there. So we're all out for lunch, and I'm nervous because it's kind of my first time out with evangelicals at lunch, and I want to make a good impression. So during lunch, Becky Piepert, who wrote the book Out of the Salt Shaker, that was used a lot of churches. Anyway, Becky Piepert said, "Tony, tell Will about our trip to England this summer." And Tony said, "Oh, you know, England, just boring people." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, anyway," I said, "Becky made the best presentation at this missions conference with all these serious-looking English women in sensible shoes. And she made the best presentation. And after it was over, the first question, he said, first question was, how can you justify as a woman preaching in church?" And Tony said, it just pissed me off. So he said, we had our prayer for our lunch, and I stood up and I said, "I'll be speaking after lunch, and I am going to be conducting a course on how to smuggle Bibles into the Soviet Union. And so I want you to come to my presentation with a suitcase. Bring your suitcases, and I will teach you how you can be a Bible smuggler into the Soviet Union." And Becky said, he did, it was just a... And so we came back after lunch for the presentation, and he said, you know how the English are, they can't take a joke. They showed up with all these suitcases. And I said, all right, let's, before we begin, I want us to have a moment of silence for Bertha Smith. Bertha Smith, legendary Bible smuggler, was accosted, as many as you know, earlier this year at a checkpoint going into East Berlin. And she, of course, had 2 Schofield chain reference Bibles in her thighs. And so the authorities did a strip search on her, and she went in another room, and when she was in the room, Bertha ate 2 Schofield chain reference Bibles with Moroccan leather binding, and then Bertha tragically died sometime later from blockage of her colon. And I want just a moment of silence. And Becky said, it was just, they were all sitting there, And then Tony said, all right, get out those suitcases now. First thing I want you to do is rip all the lining out of those suitcases. Just go ahead, rip it out right now. Rip it out, because we're going to put the Bibles in. And so I'm sitting there thinking, geez, am I supposed to laugh at this or what? Because I want to make a good impression with evangelicals. Anyway, that was my introduction to Tony Campolo. And Tony repeatedly said he believed everything evangelical Christians believed. In the book that we did together, The Survival Guide for Young Christians on Campus, Tony says there, nice thing about being a Christian is you don't have to believe a whole bunch of stuff. You believe the Apostles' Creed. And if you can't believe everything in the Apostles' Creed right now, that's okay. Keep saying it. It'll come to you eventually. And just a wonderful affirmation of that. And yet, I was talking to a great historian of American Christianity, Grant Wacker, and I said, Tony was truly an evangelical. He believed all the evangelical tenets about salvation, the Lordship of Christ, Scripture. And Grant said yes, and he believed he was an evangelical and more. And I think that was an apt description of Tony. He was an evangelical. It's one thing that made him such a threat to a lot of conservative Christians, because Tony sounded like a conservative Christian. He affirmed everything conservative Christians believed, and yet he more, in the sense that when Tony said Jesus Christ is Lord, he meant considerably more than like Lord of my heart, Lord of my personal emotions, that Jesus, that's a political term that can only be adequately discussed politically. And yet, as I can tell you, in Duke University Chapel, his sermons there, he was really tough on liberal Christians who he said were just basically a little to the left of the Democratic Party, but their Christology was lacking. And I remember Tony, certain key moments. It was amazingly generous. When he'd come to Duke, he would be willing to meet with students on a Saturday night, 9 o'clock on a Saturday night on the Duke campus. He would draw 200 students. Who does that? And generously, and then preach the next morning in Duke Chapel. And I remember he came on one weekend. That was when we were starting the first Bush War in Iraq to end all wars in Iraq. And we're starting, and someone said, "What do you think about the war?" And he said, "I'm a Christian. I think it's a travesty. We could do this." And some of the students kind of gasped, and then Tony said, and somebody said, "Well, what would you do if you were faced with Saddam Hussein?" And I remember Tony said, "I would like to see the United States dump about $6 billion worth of medicine and food in Iraq next week." And he said, "You think Saddam Hussein would still be in power the week after?" Well, people kind of laughed, but I remember in 2 weeks of the war, we had spent $16 billion in the war. Because you see, we're being more realistic than Christians about things. Well, I thought about that. You know, I love that Tony gave the world a chance to see Christians thinking creatively about matters. His first visit to Duke, in a discussion before the chapel service on Sunday, a student said to him, "What do you think," and this was a long time ago, and somebody said, "What do you think about homosexuality?" And Tony said, "I'm tired of talking about homosexuality with you short-haired evangelicals." And he said, no, we want to know what you think about it. He said, "All right." He said, aren't you troubled that the President of the United States is living in sin in the White House with another man's wife?" And the student said, "President Reagan?" And he said, yeah. They both are married to other people. And they got divorced. And he said, "Check out Jesus on that sometime. He's downright negative about it." And so the students say, wait a minute. The Reagans, there's this story, they have their reasons. And Tony said, right. Now, I want you to use the same compassionate biblical interpretation that you're using now on Jesus' clear comments that I want you to use that same thing when you think about homosexuality. And is it right or is it wrong? He said, there, at least you don't have to worry about Jesus, because he wasn't interested in that subject. Well, it seemed to me that was the kind of typical exuberance Tony. And, of course, famously, everybody knows that Tony's the memorable sermon line was, and I think he first used this, at least to say, first reported to me, when Tony spoke to the Southern Baptist Convention of North Carolina, and he begins his speech, last night, 1,800 children died due to hunger, starved to death. And the Southern Baptists of North Carolina don't give a shit. And he paused for effect and said, and you're more upset that I used the word shit in front of Baptists than that I just told you 1,600 children died. And he used that line again at other places. The Baptist minister described it to me, said, then he grabbed us by the throat and worked on us for 45 minutes. He jerked us around. He said, the only line I remember there was, he said, a lot of you Baptist preachers are better at using a blow dryer than a Bible. He said, that hurt. And that kind of statement in a sermon is risky to make. And yet, I remember Harvard's preacher Peter Gomes saying to me, good preachers always have got to risk. And if they don't risk, one, they're not only probably boring, two, they're not preaching as Jesus Christ preaches. And so Tony was that way. In my mind, he put Eastern University on the map for many of us, and bless you for carrying on that Campolo tradition here. He was proud of his PhD, sociology, from Temple, but he liked nothing better, at least when he was at Duke, than to puncture academic pretentiousness and presumption, and he was, this wasn't in the pulpit, but it was during a discussion, and I said, we've got a Department of Religious Studies here at Duke, and I said, I'm preach at the chapel, and I'm always trying to convince students now there's a difference. There's a difference. Don't think because you take a religion class, they're going to be doing the same thing we do over here at the chapel. That at the chapel, I said, the Department of Religious Studies, they want to talk about religion. They want to study religion. But over at the chapel, we believe in doing religion. And Tony muttered loud enough for everybody in the room to hear him, and he says, yeah, and we can all thank God they're not the Department of Sex, or none of us would be here. And I said, thank you, Tony, thank you. Every sermon I heard Tony preach was always a performance. And I remind you that Augustine in De Doctrina Christiana talks about what preaching ought to do. It has three purposes, to teach, to delight, and to move. And in that regard, Tony was always a very Augustinian preacher. He really, really wanted to get a hearing. He really wanted to convey not simply information, but engagement, discipleship, obedience, but I love the playfulness, along with Syria, the belligerence, and I think the provocative, intentionally so. Particularly, that's made him a particularly wonderful evangelist for college students. And I'm sure that Tony's membership at Alfred Campbell's Mount Carmel Church gave Tony's preaching that exuberant kind of African-American vibe that he worked so well. Nobody knows how often Tony preached. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And he got that as a gift from the black church. I think, too, he seemed to have discovered in the black church a people that have learned how to resist, how to protect their young through the preached word, where the preached word has a sacredness about it. And I remember in Duke Chapel, he ends a sermon by saying, Jesus Christ has taken every filthy, perverted, ugly sin you've ever committed and nailed it to the cross. Nailed it to the cross. And thus forgiven you. He stopped and he said, that's it. I have just told you that Jesus Christ has taken every disgusting thing you've ever done and all the disgusting things that you think about and are, and he has nailed that to the cross, and you sit there? You people need to be de-honkified. And they loved it. And I remember the Sunday he said, now you'll notice in the pew racks, I've got these cards about a ministry I've got in Philadelphia. And I want you, if you're a student, looking for something good to do with your summer, I want you to fill out one of those cards. Okay? And then going to be taken up afterwards. And you're asking, do I have to fill out the card? Is it required? Yes! Don't fill out the card, you could burn in hell. Fill out the card. And then he said, now here you are, Duke. You're going on to success. As America defines success. You're going on into banking and finance and politics and business and law. And you're asking me, well, what's wrong with that? My daddy did that. Isn't that okay? What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. It could be boring, which is a sin against the life God has given you. Why don't you do something risky? Why don't you do something that'll make your parents mad? Follow Jesus Christ! And with that, the place just erupted. People started screaming, applauding, throwing things. And that was Tony. And I often thought, too, that he really understood, maybe he got this from the black church, I don't know, but he really understood that preaching is affective and is meant to move. It's not sharing more information, because there ain't that much information on Jesus to be shared, but it's recruitment. And that really came through in every time I heard him preach. And one of the great moments of my life was get to be part of a book with Tony about how to be a Christian and a college student at the same time. And Tony got into Pentecostalism, he got into sex, he got into how to listen to a sermon, as was said, and it was, and I remember in the beginning, Tony said, in the book he wrote, your vocation, your job, as it is to be a student. Your job is to study. The thing is, if you're a Christian, you're not doing that just for yourself. You're doing it because that pleases the God that has called you to do this. And he said, messing around and not studying for your classmates is one thing, but for you as a Christian, first thing you got to do is do your job that Christ has assigned you. And anyway, I thought that was great. First time I invited Tony to preach at Duke Chapel, a student on Friday knocked on my office door and said, "Hi, Tony Campolo is preaching," and he said, "I'm from Pennsylvania, and anyway, I'd like to introduce Dr. Campolo before he preaches." And I said, "We don't use. I'll introduce him, and we don't really have time for that and all." I said, "But if you were introducing him, what would you say?" And here, this very young-looking, very blonde Duke sophomore stood there in my office and said, "Well, when I was in high school, I signed up for this ministry in Philadelphia that Dr. Campolo had, and so I didn't know what I was getting into because there wasn't much information about it and all. My parents were nervous about my doing it. And anyway, we started out in this Black Baptist church in Philadelphia, and we, like 200 college students, and we sang all these Jesus songs for an hour and then an hour and a half, and and finally Tony shows up and he preaches, and we all get worked up, and he said, "Okay, you want to go out there and tell them about Jesus, right? We're going to share Jesus, and go out there, we're going to talk to people, we're going to pray with them, pray for them, pray with them, and tell them about Jesus. Now, let's go, get on the bus." And so we all run out of the church, get on these buses they got, and said we were in a bad part of town to start with, but we started riding, and we were singing Jesus songs while we were riding, and but it got to look more and more burned out, difficult part of town, and the singing got a little quieter. We started looking out the windows, and so we stopped in front of this, on this corner, in front of this tenement house, and said, Tony jumped on the bus. He says, "Okay, gang, get out there and tell them about Jesus. I'll be back at 4 o'clock to pick you up." And so we got off the bus, and somebody said, "Hey, we should pray." And said, "Oh, okay, that's a good idea." So we all held hands, and we prayed there. And then we split up and went on our ways, and said, I walked down the street, and I walked down there to this building. It looked like it had been abandoned, but I could hear a baby crying in the building. So I said, well, somebody's in there. So I go in there. Smelled terrible. It was dark, trash in the stairway and all, but I heard this baby crying, so I walked up the steps and I knocked on the door. And a voice inside said, "Who is it? What do you want?" And I said, "Hello, I'm here and would like to pray for you." And said the door came open, and this woman looked out at me, and I said, "Hi, I'm here to talk to you about Jesus." And he said, with that, said she was holding a baby, a naked baby. And said, with that, she started cursing me, and she cursed me all the way down the hall, down the steps, out onto the street, and told me never to come back again. And so I sat there, and I just wanted to cry. And I thought, oh, boy, some evangelist I am. And he said, so I prayed, Lord, give me something here. And so I walked down the street, and there was this bars, convenience store, bars over the windows and all. I walked in the convenience store, and I remembered that the woman was smoking, and I remembered the baby didn't have a diaper on. So I went in there, and I bought a box of diapers and a package of cigarettes. And went back down the street and went in the building, and I walked back upstairs, said a little prayer, knocked on the door. And the door came open. She said, "Didn't I tell you?" And it said, so I took the box of diapers, I shoved it in the door, and those cigarettes, and I shoved those in there, and said, she stood there and looked at them, and she said, "Come in." So I walked in, and I sat on this old sofa, was all they had there, and she took the cigarettes and offered me a cigarette. I smoked my first cigarette there. And she sat there just staring at me, didn't say anything, and I didn't know what to say to her. So then I thought, well, I'll put the diaper on the baby. And it said, turns out those things are hard to know what to stick where, and said I had a hard time with it, and she started laughing, but got it on the baby. And so she said, "White boy, what are you doing here?" And he said, I got sent here. And she said, "Who the hell would send a boy like you in a place like this?" And he said, "Well, Jesus Christ." And she said, "What?" And she said, what kind of person would do? Tell me about Jesus Christ." And he said, so I told her everything I knew about Jesus Christ. Took me no more than about 7 or 8 minutes, and I was done. And she said, "Why does he want me?" And he said, "Well, that's kind of all of us have to kind of figure out. I wonder why he loves me." And said about 2 that afternoon, she said, "Pray for me and my baby, that we're going to make it out of here. Pray." And he said, so I prayed. And so 4 o'clock, I went back on the street, bus pulled up, and we all got on the bus. Tony jumped on the bus, and he said, "Well, gang, did you get to tell them about Jesus?" And I said quietly, I said, "No, I got told about Jesus." Just thank you, Tony. The last evangelical. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Willimon. I'm really thrilled that we will get to continue this conversation with you now by inviting 2 Campolo fellows out onto the stage to talk a little bit more with you, to have a little repartee. Let me introduce them here as well. James Williams serves as senior pastor of the historic First Baptist Church of Philadelphia. He came out very soon. James is an alumnus of Palmer Theological Seminary and has served as a presidential scholar, a Cider scholar, a Campolo scholar, and a church mutual religion scholar. Reverend Williams is passionate about his work with marginalized groups within society, particularly Philadelphia's unhoused immigrant and LGBTQ+ communities. He is also a PhD candidate, focusing his work on practical theology and homiletics here at Eastern University, where he currently serves as the Kerygma Initiative and the Campolo Research Fellow. I was going to say, please welcome Reverend James Williams. Our second panelist is Reverend David Brown. Reverend David Brown has owned or managed 5 advertising or public relations firms throughout his 30-plus year career in Philadelphia. He is the only living African American inducted into the Philadelphia Public Relations Association Hall of Fame. He was named a champion of change by the Obama administration for his communications work around empowering nonprofits to make a difference in the communities they serve. Reverend Brown is a published author and has served as the general manager for 900 AM WURD, Pennsylvania's only African-American-owned talk radio station. He serves as managing director for Common Soul Communication, which is a consultancy that works with mission-focused organizations. He is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church and has led an effort to transform a 175-year-old historically Black and underused church into a vibrant community resource. He presently serves as a part-time member on the ministry staff at First United Methodist Church in Media, Pennsylvania. He's a busy guy. He is also an associate professor and the assistant dean for community and communication at the Klein College of Media and Communication at Temple University. He is a Campolo Fellow, and he's working on a PhD in professional practice, researching the future of Black United Methodist churches in Philadelphia. Please join me in welcoming Reverend David Brown. I will turn things over to you all.
Wow. Well, I would love to start. When Dr. Stark was introducing you, Dr. Willimon, he made mention of your love for good trouble. And we think of John Lewis, and I also think of Tony, who had a kind of a heart, I think, for good trouble. What kind of good trouble would you like to see the church be getting into in this season?
Oh, well, part of me says it's getting easier and easier to get into trouble because with some of the pagan things happening. I think I'd like the church to keep ever focused on the truth. Who has a face and a name, Jesus Christ. And I mentioned that it's interesting to me, in public discourse, you hear a lot about God, and God is with us, and fortunately, you don't hear much about Jesus. And that's one way people keep from having their Christian faith have much ethical content, because Jesus is kind of He is the content. And so I'd like that to be focused upon. And I was a Presbyterian pastor in Florida telling me a couple years ago, he said after Trump said some hateful things about immigrants, he said, that Sunday, I just merely came out in front of the congregation and I opened up the book of Deuteronomy and I just simply read there, you will not persecute the foreigner in your gates. You will show kindness, hospitality toward the stranger among you and all. I just read it, didn't say nothing about it. And I just said, word of the Lord, shut the book, and went on to service. And said the next week, 2 of my most well-paying families left the church. He said, by the way, both of them were from North Carolina, wintering in Florida. But, and I said, that's horrible. That's just terrible that people would do that. And he said, well, I'm not like you. I'm not that great a preacher. He said, I'm not good with poetry and illustrations and making stuff interesting and all like that. He said, so I just think it's kind of wonderful to get to preach at a time when all you got to do is read from Deuteronomy, and even people from North Carolina will get the point. And I said, wow, that's a positive attitude. But 2, I would just urge preachers. I think it's natural for us preachers to worry about who gets upset, who doesn't like, who wishes we wouldn't talk about. We don't do a good job of counting all those people who've just left because they've given up hope that anything challenging or new was going to be said in church. And how about those people? And to think about them, and I love, if say you I slip up and say something that somebody takes offense by, and they maybe get mad at me, I say, I'm not the one that invited you to come worship Jesus Christ. Yeah, that was your mistake. Don't get on me. Come whining back to me. It's so hard. I just can't hear this kind of stuff. It upsets me. I said, yeah. Wait till you hear him on some other subjects if you don't like that. That in a way, maybe we preachers ought to restore the kind of adventure of discipleship, where people say, wow, I'm not the best person in the world. I got a lot of problems. I'm inherently deceitful. But I'm coming back next Sunday, even after Jesus talked to me the way he did today. So,
Thank you. Dr. Willimon, I want to begin at the end, that powerful story you told about trying to go talk about Jesus. And I think it's fitting, too, that we talk about what the church is doing. This example was going out into the community, very much so. And I think that, and I'd love to hear your views on that, we're going to encounter more people as Jesus did on the corner than in the sanctuary. So equipping churches and pastors to be more risky and adventurous and not worry about, well, there goes the big donor. One, how do we do that? Particularly, and we share the United Methodist tradition in that you got to kind of pay your apportionment while you're trying to do justice. I'm talking inside language, but that's truth. How then do we find those opportunities to go buy the cigarettes and diapers?
You could have waited just a little longer before you attacked bishops. Okay, you couldn't hold it back. Though.
I couldn't. I'm sorry. It was right there.
I think. I just think we ought to be the church, and we ought to preach under the conviction that Jesus Christ really means for us to succeed at this, that God so loved, the first Bible verse I ever loved, I learned. As a kid, I got 25 cents for learning it. God so loved me, and people who look a lot like me, that he gave, no. Jesus thinks he owns all of it. He thinks he died for all of it. So therefore, the people on the corner, the people down the street, they're his. Sadly, many of them are enduring the indignities of racism and poverty and violence and prejudice. They're enduring that without Jesus, without knowing the truth. And that is, Jesus is going to get back what belongs to him, and he's going to win. And we're Christians are called to be just a glimpse of that, just a foretaste of what one day shall be forever. Again, I get back to theology, Christology, I think, is the only thing that keeps us at it. But, and two, I somehow, not to be critical of evangelicals, but I think somehow we in America, we made religion personal and private. And there's nothing in the New Testament to suggest it's public, it's universal, the important thing is that in Jesus Christ, God has made this determinative decision for us. And it's our job to do everything we can to get the word out. I've gone preaching.
No, thank you. And it's appropriate that you've gone preaching because you were named one of the most effective preachers of the English-speaking language.
I wish David hadn't.
I love it, though. It comes across on Google very quickly.
Because I could feel the audience sitting there saying, "Oh, really? Well, We'll decide that tonight. Let's see what he got. And they're very disappointed. And go ahead.
So what, in your estimation, what makes an effective preacher, and what would you like to see more of in preaching today to that end?
Not to be cute, but I think an effective preacher tries to preach like Jesus. And we try to preach Jesus. But that ain't easy. One is, and part of that, Jesus appears to have preached away more people than he won. We all know Luke 4 and what happened when he went to his hometown synagogue. And so it means that to be able to announce, now is the acceptable year of the Lord, now God has come for God's people, and God's people get all excited and say, whoa, wait, whoa. The last time God came for us, God worked the other side of the street with the Canaanite woman and all, and the Naaman the Syrian. But it concerns me, I go to church the Sunday that we attacked Iran, and without declaring war and all, and after we had wiped out a little girl's school. So I go to church, and the sermon that Sunday is on joy, and how to have more joy in your life, and aren't you ashamed of yourself that you're not more joyful? And I think, it was an Episcopal church, I look around, yeah, they're Episcopalians, they should be joyful, they got a lot of money, it looks to me like, and power. But no mention was made of the war in the entire service. I didn't want the whole service to be about the war, but as we left, Patsy said to me, my wife said, I worry that a high price is being paid when people come in there and all of the country is gripped by this war and all, pro, con, whatever. And yet you come to church and Jesus Christ is irrelevant to any of that. So I think it's my job as a preacher to say, to answer the question from the congregation, hey, is any word from the Lord? And I said, well, try this. Here's something I think I've heard. One of my definitions of preaching is a biblical preacher joins a conversation that is occurring between God and God's people. And you contribute to that conversation with the sermon. And then you step back and see where God might take that conversation the rest of the week. I like that because it reminds me as a preacher, I'm not bringing Jesus to them. He's already busy working on them now. And my role is maybe sometimes to name that, to point to that and all. And also to not get in the way of the conversation. I know one Sunday I preached on forgiveness, and the text, and I preach usually from the lectionary, the common lectionary that assigns the text. Anyways, on forgiveness. And so come out, and this listener comes up to me and says, do you mean to tell me that my abusive husband, that I finally had the guts to walk out on after 10 years of abuse, Jesus expects me to now forgive him? And I said, whoa, look, we only have about 20 minutes for these sermons, and I can't properly qualify everything that I say, and spouse abuse is a horrible evil, and he did say, forgive your enemies, and I can't think of a bigger enemy than your ex-husband. And I don't know that I would say this, but it does sound something like Jesus said, 70 times. I mean, that's a lot of And she rose up to her full height, and she said, thank you, just checking, and walked out. And I swear it was like the heavens opened, and a voice said, wait a minute, who told you your job was to protect her from me? You look at her, best you can do in your culture is, oh, you're a victim. Oh, keep your head down. You have no moral responsibility now. You're a victim. Just keep your head down. I look at her and I see a disciple, and I'm getting ready to tear down this whole world with her if you'll get out of the way and let me have her. And so it's so much fun to be a preacher and get part of that dynamic. You know, well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about, and I hope I get this right, that the three things that you mentioned about preaching, right, was I think teach, delight, and move, right? And just as you had just answered that last question, that it is an awesome responsibility, but also I think that one thing I've learned from both being in your presence and reading your writing, that there's also a sense of humility. That you're not Jesus. You're like you said, I need to get out of the way, and whatever I'm going to say, and what's on your heart. And I think that that's one thing that I love about the common theme on, particularly as a Campolo fellow, is that Tony acted. It's like you can hear what I say. I'm a gifted preacher, but it's about the praxeology. What are you going to do? So if I'm teaching. And I'm delighting, and that's a hard one. But the move part, to me, is critically important. And you can't do it all the time. But in that last example, what you had to do is move out of the way so Jesus could do what he needed to do in that setting. So I think about those things, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how then because it's really a judgment call. When do you know that I'm not going to be perfect in my preaching, but I'm hoping that I'm being the tool that God needs me to be in this setting today.
Oh, I'm hearing a lot there, but humility, I'm rarely charged with that, but I like it. I like it. Thank you. Good. One of the joys of ministry is those moments when you realize you don't work alone, and that people will come out and report things to you. You've had this happen, that they'll say, "Oh, that was a great sermon about abortion. I'm so glad you talked about abortion." And I said, "What? I got the manuscript. There's no mention of abortion in the entire manuscript. What are you talking about?" Well, I think that Bonhoeffer said there's only one preacher. It's Jesus. We preach so that he might preach. And that's an observation that it's amazing what Jesus will say to people that I didn't intend to say. And if I had something important to say, I probably wouldn't have said it to that person because I know they're unreliable, and because they said they wanted to be on the finance committee and then they didn't show up. And I say to Jesus, you're just going to be disappointed by her. Anyway, and he says, look, you've cured me of that. But it also means, too, that Jesus talks to who he wants to talk to, and sometimes he doesn't talk. So when somebody comes out and says, I didn't get a thing out of that sermon, that didn't feed me at all, I could say, I don't say this, but I could legitimately say, well, I'm sorry, we have war in the Near East now, and maybe the Holy Spirit is occupied over there. Maybe, I don't know why God doesn't want to talk to you this morning. take it up with the Lord. I did my best, and but it does mean I don't control the communication. So that means that a lot of times people hear stuff that I think, wait a minute, I'm not responsible for that. But a lot of times, the nice thing about being a preacher, when they don't hear, you can say, I don't know why I worked so hard on that sermon, and I gave it everything I had, and I did all the right moves, but just nothing, just zombies out there. And but I think it keeps reminding us that we're all empty-handed when it comes to having Jesus, that it's a gift. It's called grace. And it ain't grace if it's predictable and programmable. It is a gift, but it makes it all the more wonderful. And I remember the joy of a student, saying to me after a Sunday service, and about, I really feel God wanting me to do this. And I remember the student saying, kind of shaking his head, and he said, I just can't believe God would choose a loser like me for something this hard. And I said, that's beautiful. I should have said that on the day I was ordained. And it's a gift. But go with the conviction God has chosen you. And
a lot of what you have said tonight has been provocative, and I don't know if that's the intention, but it has been, and it certainly pulls our ears in. And Tony was known for his provocative ministry as well, and you noted tonight his most cited quote with 30,000 children dying. What role does provocation play in homiletics or preaching?
Interesting. I don't know that I've thought about that much, but I would want to say, what does it play any role in, like, Jesus preaching or Jesus? Seen from one angle, you could say Jesus is God's ultimate provocation. We said, Lord, come among us, send us a Savior. And we said with one voice, not that one, not a Jew, okay? Not from Nazareth, not somebody who dies on a cross, not somebody who tells us the truth that we'd rather avoid. And Flannery O'Connor said, modern people are so well insulated against the truth. Sometimes you've got to shock, you've got to push forward the freak that about people that are so well insulated against that was her justification for her writing. And I don't know, I think and maybe I was affected by being a campus minister for 20 years. And students, I think, young adults, maybe by their very nature, kind of enjoy surprises. And they kind of show up at college and say, okay, hit me. Come on. Tell me something my parents haven't told me. Make me a more interesting person than I would be if I'd stayed in Des Moines and not paid this tuition and come here. Well, that's a wonderful thing for a preacher. Two, I think, maybe Christianity has been so smoothed out. Jesus has been so smoothed down that he loved little children. He was nice to people with disabilities. And, no, the one thing we really, really know for sure about Jesus, he was crucified. So therefore, an appropriate question after every sermon is, why would you have killed, tortured to death somebody for saying that? It's a fair question. Not everything Jesus said was like that, but enough was to get him killed. So therefore, provocation, I love that where Paul says, I'm a Methodist, so I can't exactly recall where he said it. But I'm among Baptists, and surely you Baptists know. But provoke one another to good works. And I love that. Just prod and provoke and smack people enough that they'll do some good works. I love that. And two, Jesus was not crucified for saying, blessed are the lilies. So I think provocation, and I just think too, it's almost a sin. Okay, it's a sin to make Jesus Christ boring, because this is not the surprise we wanted.
Thank you, Dr. Willimon and panelists. We'll continue this conversation, but I want to open it up now to you all. We have a microphone over here. We have about 15 minutes left. What questions would you have for for Bishop Willimon or for the panelists? Please come to the microphone.
That's fine.
And we can carry that microphone back, I believe, also. So.
Thank you so much for what you've offered us today. It was very helpful. I am an alum of Palmer Theological Seminary 2016. And my question for you is, you mentioned a few things with regards to engagement, discipleship, obedience, playfulness, and provocation. The question that I have is with regards to, I don't want to single out the black church, but that's what I'm most accustomed to. And I'm wondering how you would speak to performance over preaching.
Ooh.
Let me just be clear.
Yeah.
There seems to be pressure to act as an entertainer rather than a man or woman of God in a consumeristic culture.
Thank you for talking about the black church and not about Methodists.
Will you hold up the microphone?
I know where you're implying. And maybe I'm being defensive, and you can tell me, but in one sense, preaching is performance, and in a way, what's one goal of preaching? One goal is for me to be up here and I perform the word in order to get you in the pew to go out and perform the word Monday through Saturday in the world. Your job's harder than mine in the pulpit. So in a way, performance can be a positive word. However, I think I know what you're talking about. We live in an entertainment-saturated culture. I don't watch morning TV because it's always, they have somebody who's been in a recent movie in Hollywood, and they say, what do you think about the economy now, and how can we improve it? I think they don't know nothing. They sit there reading, it's a movie star. That's all that is. But it is hard. I taught preaching in Germany, and I showed them videos of American preachers, including Martin Luther King, one of his sermons. And the Germans said, wow, it's awfully hard to preach in a culture where everything is entertainment. And so it's awfully hard to be a professor in such a world, because it sometimes feels like students sit back and say, okay, let's do it. Let's see. It's not that interesting, or, yeah. So, and two, that when I preach, you're right to expect a congruence between how I preach and what I preach and my life. You're bothered if you think, gee, this looks like just an act here. Just somebody's going through a script. Somebody's trying to look like somebody else, strutting about like that. Yeah. I do, though, I'm at Princeton right now at the Center for Theological Inquiry, and so they got a bunch of theologians there talking about things, and me. And I notice in academia, there's that sense about, I don't have to talk to you in such a, when I'm giving a lecture, I don't have to project. I don't have to look at you, bodily look at you. I don't have to gesture. I don't have to reach out toward you because I'm so brilliant, the brilliance of my ideas. And if you say to me, that just didn't engage me, well, that means you're not very smart because I'm brilliant with these. I love it the way preachers really find ways to get across things. A few months ago, I heard a preacher start out, and he started out his sermon and said, this is a sermon today I didn't want to preach. And y'all know me, I wouldn't preach this sermon if it weren't that I was not put up to it and pushed into it. And I've never liked this biblical text. I've always had a problem with it, but come on, pray for me. I'm going to try to see what I can do with it. Well, I sat there thinking, he's good. He's very good. Wow. The whole congregation sitting there like this. You know, that's kind of performance, but I'm also saying that's also somebody saying, I want to, and I just close by saying, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not simply purveyors of the truth, but they're artists who realize the truth named Jesus Christ has got to be talked about in such a way. It's just amazing. You'd think Matthew would say, let me give you 6 biblical principles for why Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God. 1, you know, they never talk like that. What he says is, Jesus shows up and goes on a road trip. And along the way, he sees 2 people and says, follow me. And they, you know, so I'm just saying, I'm not half as performative and artistic as the Gospels themselves. So I think there's a tension there. But I hope all of us preachers in the congregation have people around us to say, to find a way to say, I'm kind of concerned because your public persona up there, strutting around with that microphone, is, there's a gap there. But we could talk more.
I'd like to thank you, too, for saying so many enlightening things, so many thought-provoking things tonight. I wanted to just make a comment first and then ask a question, if that's all right. My comment is that we all know, I guess, that Tony Campolo came to lots of churches besides around here, and he came to Haddonfield Methodist many times to talk to us. And one time he came there and he talked about gays. And he said gays should, be proud of who they are, but not act on what their sexuality is. So I happened to run into him on the street in Haddonfield after the talk, and I said, isn't it kind of arrogant and unfair to expect gay people not to do what straight people do? It seems unfair to me for straight people to have all the fun, and for gay people to be expected not to have any. It just didn't make any sense at all to me. And I was disappointed because I adored that man, and I was very disappointed by what he said about gayness. So fast forward several years, he was at Ocean City Tabernacle, which is another place he was always speaking. The room was packed as always, and he was sitting right next to me. And I said, "Do you still feel the same way about gays?" I'm not one to just mince words. And he said, "I have completely changed my outlook." He said, "I've met some gay people." He said, "My wife all along has said I was wrong." He said, "But I've met some gay people through her. I have been so impressed by what they had to say about Christianity, about life in general. I just got to know them, and my feeling now is they were born the way they're born. They were born to be gay, and that's it. And God made them the way they are." And I was madly in love with Tony Campolo after hearing that, because he had already had a heart attack or two, and he was way up in age. He wasn't far from dying, and yet he was still, at that point in his life, able to change his opinion about something. That is pretty rare in any human being.
Amen.
Yeah. So that's my comment. The second thing is, I think he and Bart, his son Bart, separated in their thoughts about Christianity at some point. And I know that they each wrote a book about why they differ. I'm just wondering if anybody up there knows anything about what's going on lately with Bart and how Tony and he managed, to talk together after that happened.
Your second point first, that's one of the questions I asked at dinner about where is Tony and Bart. I thought it was so typically Tony and maybe typically Bart that this family, what was experienced as a family tragedy, a family break that occurred over Thanksgiving and all, they took it public, and they processed that in public, which I think, Tony's a preacher, it's public. And I haven't read, but the book that they published together, Why I Left, Why I Stayed. I love that title. And I think to show a father-son struggling with that, what wonderful for the rest of us. But about Tony's impression about same-sex relationships and all, Tony was sort of public in his deliberations about that. I told him tonight he was the only preacher in my 20 years at Duke Chapel that ever got picketed on a Sunday morning by the Gay Lesbian Alliance because they had read something Tony had said and they took offense. And I was very embarrassed that, picketing in front on Sunday morning. And of course, Tony said, I want to meet them. I want to talk to them. And so in that, I think he was a wonderful model to us. And I would attribute some of that movement. Tony said on a couple of occasions, "Hey, I'm a Pentecostal." A lot of Pentecostals don't think I am, but I am. And I think he really had a dynamic view of the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit is in motion, keeps us in motion, and he was in motion with it. But the beautiful thing was he kind of wove that into his ministry and brought along a lot of the rest of us with him. But in that, I agree. And maybe as a pastor, as a preacher, I should look for more opportunities to bring people along with me as I am in process, rather than standing up at the pulpit and saying, "Here's the final word now from on high, fixed," but to help show people here's the journey I've been on. Well, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is William Turner. I am in the DMin program here at Palmer. I am ashamed to say this is my first time exploring and learning about Campolo and the whole Campolo movement. So I definitely appreciate it.
Good.
I definitely appreciate the tension from the comment that you wrestled with and pushed back a little bit on performance versus preaching performance-based. And I think in this cancel culture, I think the performance part gets a bad rap. I don't know Tony Campolo, but as a preacher, I definitely related to everything you said about him. And when he talked about the black church, it seemed like there was a compassion and passion that he discovered inside the black church. And I think those are the things that transform us. That's where we have to push back on this performance base and appreciate the gift of preaching what it is. And I think the other thing I was going to mention was that the very reason, and I think it's amazing that everyone in this room tonight has used the term black church. And there is there's a reason why we're using the term black church, because instead of the performance base, I think there is a traumatic piece that African Americans have gone through, that now that the Lord is using this gift of preaching in such a creative way to heal people and to reach people in such a way. I think one person, and I'll close on this, talked about the difference between Good Friday services and the Methodist Episcopal Church. They come out of Good Friday and everyone is solemn and Jesus is dead, but Sunday's coming. But in every black church, there's 7 preachers with 7 closes and 7 celebrations, which speaks to the traumatic experiences and the need for celebration and celebratory for the journey that we've been on. So I think pushing back and understanding that it may not be so much performance and killing that as much as it is creativity and healing and coming out of a traumatic experience and meeting people where they are to present Jesus in a powerful way. And then that leads me to my second question. My only question is, what books are you currently reading, and what books would you recommend to any preachers in the house tonight? And thank you very much for your presentation.
The books, I'm a little hesitant in that, look at me, I'm leaving. I'm retiring, and preaching is alive and dynamic and changing. I could mention books like Barbara Brown Taylor's Preaching Life and Tom Long, Cleophas LaRue. His books I found helpful, and Princeton. Gardner, there were those who were influenced on me, but I'm keenly aware that there's a new generation coming along, and they're going to talk about preaching differently and all. And also, I think on the performance thing, before we leave that as a young person, I, as a college student, sampled the civil rights movement a little bit in that time in college and all. And first thing I noted in the black churches we attended was the volume was so loud. And the preachers shouted. And then one of my African-American friends said to me, you see, we've been forced to keep our voices down in white spaces. We stand at the dining room table and serve, and we're not allowed to talk. So when we get in a church, that's free space. That's God's house, and we can shout if we want to. And so I think, and sometimes, I know, like when Jeremiah Wright was criticized during the Obama campaign, and I was bishop in Alabama at the time, and he was criticized for mocking, for cursing, deriding, making fun of politicians, America, and everything. And one of my district superintendents said, "You walk into any black Methodist church in Alabama this Sunday, the preacher's going to do some mocking, and he is going to do some sarcasm, and that kind of performance is kind of, I just think it's kind of helping the rest of us gain some courage in facing up to the principalities and powers, claiming our own agency. And sometimes we sit there thinking, wow, thank you, preacher. You're saying what I wish I could say. And I wish I could say it that way. Thank you for saying it. You're kind of preaching for me today, not to me. And so the performance can be so important. It is, I was in a service a while back, and the preacher preached a very, quote, political sermon. And he, kind of the theme of the sermon was, aren't you ashamed of yourselves? You voted for Donald Trump. Look at you. You disgust me. Kind of thing. Well, my African-American friend there with me came out, and I said, that was a very strong sermon. I thought, good. He said, yeah. He said, what is it about you white preachers got to beat up on the congregation every Sunday? Said, made me feel kind of sorry for people. That that preacher said, we don't talk like that to our people. And I said, that is a good point. And the danger of it is a nice white liberal person like me, comes into a church, I get beaten over the head, and, aren't you ashamed and all? And I walk out and say, well, I feel better now. I've been to church. I've had an enema or something. And, that's kind of sick, and that's not gospel. And so I guess I'd like to say, I think it's my job as a preacher to try to perform the gospel text, doing some of the similar things done in the gospel text in similar ways. And therefore, if the text is lament, be lament. But if the text is joy, the sermon I heard on joy a couple of weeks ago, it was, rejoice in the Lord. Be joyful in all things. And the preacher said, the sermon was sort of like, look at you. Aren't you ashamed you're not more joyful? Now I want you to get out there, write this down, make a list, get out and be more joyful, people. And I'm thinking, that was kind of a violation of the text. So anyway.
Thank you, Bishop Willimon. Our time has come to a close. I do want to mention one, I see one question, maybe we can get you afterwards, because I'm aware of our time, and I'm also aware of how warm this room is. Maybe you would like some fresh air, and maybe Bishop Willimon as well. I do want to mention one thing. There was a question about recent books on preaching. I'll direct you to the Kerygma Initiative. We have a preaching innovation lab that we've been running all this year, and there are 8 different books that were published in the last year, many of which I think speak of preaching in ways that are Campolo-esque and Willimon-esque in their provocative, creative gospel proclamation. So you can check those out on our website. Please join me now in thanking our panelists, James Williams, David Brown, and our guest lecturer, Bishop Will Willimon. Thank you all, and have a good evening.